The access openings are typically not really allowing to get in there and freely move around. One of the things too that you want to be aware of is that if the space between the bottom of the floor joist and the floor to the crawl space itself, if it's less than 18 inches, clearly it's going to restrict movement. That's a pretty narrow space. But also keep in mind that a lot of lenders, especially people that buy homes with government supported loans, they want to see at least that space between the bottom of the floor joist and the floor of the crawl space be at least 18 inches, if not more. So know that a space smaller than that, and that's the bottom of the floor joist, that's the distance from the bottom of the floor joist to the floor of the crawl space. If it's less than 18 inches, a lot of lenders don't want to mortgage a home with that space because it's a difficult space to provide ventilation. It's a difficult space to take care of because of conditions with mold and moisture issues. So keep that in mind when you do an inspection for somebody and you are able to at least look inside the crawl space. If you notice that distance from the bottom of the floor joist to the floor is less than 18 inches, you might want to mention to the buyer, make sure that your lender is okay with that situation. Typically the bank appraiser, he or she will look into those situations if that's a requirement of the mortgage provider. Definitely don't enter a crawl space when there's water, and especially when the house has electric. You don't want to get shocked and you don't want to get injured. Careful on entering the crawl space when there's the possibility of animals down there as well too. Squirrels, chipmunks can be pretty vicious when you get near their food. So be careful in that situation. And also too that you cannot you shouldn't get into an attic or crawl space area where you have to damage the access panel in order to get to that space. If the access panel is nailed or sealed in some way, it could be caulking around the perimeter of that access panel. If that has to be altered or damaged, or cut into, you shouldn't remove that panel. We're not there to, be intrusive. So if the access panel to a crawl space is sealed, that's something that you want to take in mind, that it's going to minimize or not allow us to enter that space. So be aware of that. As much as a lot of inspectors can get past that panel, regardless of the way it's closed up, we have to also keep in mind that it's not our house that we're inspecting in most cases. We're not there to damage anything. So for some reason, you make it a point you want to get into that crawl space, as we should as home inspectors, or at least look into it. You want to make note that the access panel is sealed, unable to inspect the crawl space. And then at that point, you're going to openly discuss how you'd like to proceed. If you're like, hey, if the seller can remove this access panel, let me know and I'll come back and I'll inspect that crawl space. Now, your inspection just might be from the access opening. You may not necessarily be able to find yourself being able to get in the crawl space. So make sure you make that crystal clear as well. Because I've been in situations as an inspector where I said exactly that, and I've come back because the homeowner did remove the panel that was sealed. And all I did was look at the crawl space from that opening. And I've had a couple of homeowners get kind of upset. I'm like, oh, you're not going to go in there? And in most of those situations, the space in there is so tiny, I can't physically get in there, nor could anybody else for that matter, unless you're the size of a chipmunk. So a lot of times we don't know the situation in the crawl space. So keep that in mind, not only for yourself, but for the buyer, but also too for the owner if they do agree to remove that access panel, because a lot of times those crawl spaces are pretty tight. The situation with the crawl space, like I said, it's very limited in regards to what we can do for people. And so our main concern is being aware of drainage on the outside. So whether it's a basement or a crawl space, being aware of the situation with drainage, knowing that a lot of times if we can't get to the full area of the crawl space, it's going to hinder our ability to determine conditions in that area. So like the attic inspection with the crawl space as well, make it a point to identify what you can see, good and bad, but make it a point to identify the limitations that exist to both the attic space and the crawl space, and the fact that, you can't inspect what you can't see. And if if there are areas, at least with the crawl space here, where there's less than ideal drainage, make it a note that if you can't set your eyes to that area of the crawl space where drainage is not really ideal on the outside of that foundation, make it a point that you couldn't confirm or deny that there's any moisture or mold or moisture concerns in the crawl space because you couldn't see it or you couldn't physically get to it. Okay. So, if you have the choice or the option to get into an attic space versus a crawl space, the crawl space, is exactly that. At least you can maneuver yourself around a crawl space. If it's dry, wear the appropriate clothing and proceed carefully.